Welcome to episode 115 of the Headspace and Timing podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a documentary, Almost Sunrise, with one of the veterans featured in the movie, Tom Voss. Tom is an Army veteran who struggled with his own reactions to returning home from combat and decided to walk off the war with a friend.
When my platoon sergeant was killed in action, I was given the day off, and I wasn't there. For years and years, I beat myself up about why did he die and why didn't I? You know, he had a family, I didn't. I deserved to die, he didn't. These types of feelings I harbored in myself, and it would just be like a reel playing over and over and over again in my head. You know, what could I have done differently if I was out there? That was a big one for me that I really tried to tackle when I was walking across the country and really process that.
Before we kick off the interview, I'd like to bring you a quick message from Dr. Barbara Van Dalen, founder and president of Give an Hour, about an event that's coming up June 9th through the 15th.
I'm Dr. Barbara Van Dalen, founder and president of Give an Hour and the Campaign to Change Direction. We want everyone to join us the second week of June for a Week to Change Direction and the Change Direction Jam. Together, we're changing the culture of mental health. Events during the week can happen anywhere and everywhere. We're so excited to work with IBM to create this global discussion. Mark your calendar, register, and join us to change direction. Go to changedirection.org. That's changedirection.org to learn more.
Here at Headspace and Timing, we'll be joining Give an Hour during that week. The podcast episode that week will be with Dr. Van Dalen, and that week's blog post is going to focus on the campaign to change direction. Longtime listeners will know that our mission is to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health, and the campaign to change direction is doing exactly that. Make sure to check them out at changedirection.org. Welcome to the Headspace and Timing podcast, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes around veteran mental health. My name is Dwayne France, and I'm a retired Army non-commissioned officer and a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After retiring from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, then you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set correctly, however, it was just a useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my goal with this show. Change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support service members, veterans, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Headspace and Timing podcast once again, and as always, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen and learn about veteran mental health. I always say that I'm excited when I have guests on the show, and again, I really am excited to have today's guest on the show. You know that we often have mental health providers, we often have veterans, and occasionally we have had movie stars, of which today's guest is arguably one of those. So today's guest is Tom Voss from the documentary Almost Sunrise. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as we've been talking, I'm a big fan. We actually had a screening of Almost Sunrise here in Colorado Springs. You've been doing a lot of work on the movie, and definitely a big theme about that is moral injury, and we'll get into that. But I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. A little bit about myself. I served in the United States Army from 2003 to 2006 as an infantry soldier. So I deployed to Mosul, Iraq from 2004 to 2005. So while I was deployed, my platoon sergeant was killed in action. My squad leader was killed in action. You know, we had a pretty rough go of it over that time. So that really had an impact on me. So when I came back from my time from active duty, I was pretty lost, and I was pretty I struggled a lot to even comprehend kind of what I experienced over there. You know, I joined when I was 19, got out when I was 21. So, you know, you really compare yourself when you get back to a lot of your friends and a lot of your peers. And at that time, my friends were already graduating college. So I felt like I had to play catch up. So I had to get my own apartment. I had to get my own job. I had to get enrolled in school. And like, I really tried to dive into life again without really taking a step back to kind of process what I had experienced during war. So years go by of just struggling. So I found myself in this cycle of being okay for a while and then crashing and burning and then picking myself up and then getting back to it and then crashing. You know, I just kept doing this over and over and over again until finally I got to the point of where I really couldn't stand, you know, being with myself or being alive. So I thought at that time and really started contemplating suicide. So as part of a deal I made with myself, it was, you know, I really needed to give effort and give everything a shot to really try to get better. And that was kind of the deal that I made. I'm like, I'm not going to kill myself until I really give in the effort to try and heal myself and try to like all the different therapies that I can to really, you know, put in that effort. So part of that was taking the time to be with myself and process a lot of the stuff that I went through. So that ended up being walking across the country. So myself and another Iraq War veteran, we left from Wisconsin and walked around 2,700 miles to California by foot with just rucksacks and really in an effort to really process and comprehend the impact of war.
Yeah, that's this idea of walking off the ward, right? You know, and it was big. Maybe I don't see it as much now, and some different things are happening. But a buddy of mine, Jay Knight, did a bike ride across the U.S. the other way. I think from the East Coast out to Washington. I think I remember seeing a guy who was doing stand-up paddleboarding from Texas to D.C. Right, so there's this idea of, you know, Forrest Gump, right? I'm just going to keep running. I'm just going to, and in some ways I'm going to work some things out.
Right.
Why do you think that has, or maybe even for you, why did that have more of an allure than maybe just, you know, sticking around your town?
So I think the process of it, or at least my thinking behind it, was that we're just bombarded these days with so many things that we can distract ourselves with, whether it's, you know, walking around with music in or your earbuds in or your phone or the computer or TV. You know, there's so many opportunities for me to be like, nah, I don't want to look at that stuff. I don't want to look at that side of me. I don't want to deal with it because it's stressful. It brings up a lot of, you know, uncomfortable feelings. So I'm just going to, you know, binge watch a series on Netflix. So there were so many opportunities, and I recognized that. And one of the things that my buddy Anthony and I agreed upon was when we're walking, we're not going to listen to music, and we're not going to be, you know, using our phones and to the extent that we, you know, used to. And that really allows you to be with yourself. It really allows you to process things, to really sit with them and be with them and look at them from your own perspective. And I think that is what everyone is going for. So, you know, whatever the activity is, whether it's paddleboarding, whether it's walking, whether it's biking, you know, it's just you and yourself. And, you know, for some people, that's really, really scary to be there.
Yeah, and like you said, even anything. I was listening to another colleague of mine, and he had a buddy that, you know, rode a motorcycle journey from the tip of Alaska all the way down to South America. Like apparently there's this road, like you can, you go around the world or halfway around the world. Same kind of thing, right? If you're on a bike and you're not really able to do anything but be in the moment and really focus on what's going on. And so this was 10 years after you had gotten out, right? And so, you said you had tried other therapies or things just weren't working for you?
Yeah. So I tried, you know, your traditional talk therapies like EMDR, you know, going out and, peer support was a big one that really kind of helped me as well. But, what I ended up realizing was I wasn't doing these things for me. You know, I was going to the VA because my family wanted me to get help, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just go and check it out and see how it goes. And, you go through these therapy sessions, but then I realized as I'm walking, there's the difference between the walk and going to therapy was I was doing the walk for myself because I wanted to heal. I got to a point where I was just like, man, I can't take this anymore. Like, I can't live like this. So I need to do something to heal myself. And the other therapies were, trying to appease other people and being like, okay, well, I'll just give this a shot because I feel like it's what other people want me to do. And I think when you make that shift of this is for me versus this is what other people expect of me or what they want me to do or what I feel society thinks I should be doing, there's a complete shift that happens, I think, in those situations.
That's exactly right. I think there's a difference between, getting thrown in the pool, learn how to swim. If you don't want to learn how to swim, you're just going to, sink to the bottom. I mean, obviously,
totally.
And so there does have to be some buy-in, and again, I even commend you to say, I'm going to try everything because as you well know, and I know that a lot of veterans don't get to that point. They think they've tried everything.
Right.
And so this was a pretty drastic effort to just say, this was it, and I need to do something about this. So how did the documentary come about along with the walk?
Yeah, so the documentary kind of happened. An independent film production company approached Anthony and I because they saw a Kickstarter that we had. We were raising money to kind of cover our bills as we were gone, and we said we're going to do this awareness campaign for veterans issues. We want to use ourselves as an example of what's going on in the veterans community and how veterans and their families are suffering in silence. So we were able to raise some money to cover our bills for the 5-month walk, and just so happened that this production company saw our Kickstarter and reached out, and they're like, we think there might be a story here, and we'd be interested in coming out and following you. So right away, Anthony and I were, that's like red flag for us because we know that a lot of veterans, are used as political props and, for other people's, whatever motives that they have, that they want to, look like they're patriotic by supporting veterans, but then don't in the end. So that's, it's really clear to us. So we were very kind of apprehensive at first of letting a film crew come with us because, one, we thought it, could potentially take away from our own experience if you have, cameras in your face the whole time. But we sat down and kind of actually, it's funny, we kind of turned the tables on them and started interviewing them. It's like, what are your intentions? Because you never know how, someone's going to edit things, and, over 5 months, they could have made it, any way they wanted to. But I feel really fortunate that we did end up with a really good production company, a real good independent production company that really ended up caring about veterans issues and really wanting to make it known that veterans are going through tough times.
Yeah, and I get this idea of, if we don't do this, then maybe this is a story that maybe other veterans need to hear. This is one of the things
right.
that when veterans step forward to talk about their own mental health journey, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but the idea that supports them is like, yeah, but if what I say can help even one of my brothers or sisters, then maybe it'll all be worth it. My discomfort will be worth it.
Totally. That's totally the mentality. And, we got some blowback from, you always have, fringe, people, giving you a hard time online about it. But, in the end, we created it to, use our own stories as an example. And I always say, my story isn't the story. It is one story, of many. And I feel like there's a lot of veterans that have gone through way worse than what I have experienced. But I feel that we need to really support each other in this community and really come out and have open and honest conversations about what we're going through. Because, for so long, I felt that so isolated and so, that I was the only one going through this because I didn't have anyone else to connect to, and that was not the case at all. And I think it's really important as veterans that we really need to reach out to each other and share these stories, not only for each other to help each other heal, but for educating the general public about what war is like, so we can really, really make better decisions about going to war in the first place.
No, I'm right there with you. As I've said and I've written before, I hate war as only a warrior can, right? I think Eisenhower might have said it first, but those of us who saw it firsthand know the cost and would prefer not to pass that along.
Yeah.
One of the things about the film is you focused a lot on the concept of moral injury, and I've talked about it here on the show. It is something separate from PTSD, right? As well as I know, whenever you say combat veteran, the first thing that comes to somebody's mind is the PTSD.
Right.
But helping to develop the awareness around this other concept called moral injury. As we talked briefly before we started, it is a focus of what I do as a clinician. I've had others individuals on the show. Dr. Shira McGinn, Dr. Joseph Currier, Ed Tick came on the show to talk about, how military service and compact changes the way that we think and talk about what's right and wrong. But I'd like to hear your take on moral injury and sort of how you came to how you learned about it, how you came to the concept, and what your understanding of it is.
Yeah. So as far as I know, the definition is when you witness or participate in something that goes against your own moral belief or your own moral structure. So I came across that concept after the walk. It was actually a David Wood article. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff, but he has a great three-part series on Huffington. Ended up being a Huffington Post article, and it was a great three-part series on moral injury, the concept of it, and how it impacts veterans coming home. So that was the first article that I ever read about it, and it really clicked with me because it's I got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 2008. So it didn't really resonate with me though, because it's like, okay, like I have these symptoms in this symptom cluster and I fit the bill, but like I don't feel that way inside. Yes, I had these symptoms, but there's something more to it. And this was building an understanding of moral injury, and okay, you're in a combat zone, and whatever is right and wrong back home, that's all out the window, right? And now we have these other rules to play by, and you witness and you participate and you see what happens in war, and then you come home and then you're thinking, okay, what did I participate in? Was I justified in doing this? And also a really good example too is getting orders or not getting orders. This example that I like to use that my buddy Anthony experienced on his deployment was that he was going out on a mission and they were getting mortared, so he stopped. The convoy had to stop before so they couldn't go out while they were getting mortared. After they left their gate, they saw a bunch of civilians that were injured on the ground, and he asked his commander, he's like, are we going to stop and render aid? And the commander said no. So he's like, I don't know what happened to these people. I don't know if they all died on the street. I don't know, what's going on. But for him, he's like, we should have stopped and helped. We should have stopped and helped these civilians who were injured. So that's the kind of conflict that happens, over and over again in a combat zone. So you really don't really have time to process it too much in that situation because you're on 24/7 and you're moving and you're on to the next mission. But when you come home, you have time to reflect and stop. And is that the type of person I am? What kind of person am I now? So it's like you look at the concept of like moral scaffolding. Moral injury kind of reduces your moral structure to the ground, and you have to really sit back and think now, what kind of person am I? What kind of person do I want to be? Is that who I am or who I was? And a lot of these questions cause a lot of conflict, internal conflict.
I hear from veterans, and yes, there's that about themselves, but it leads to distrust because they say, well, if that could make me do that, that other person over there, they could also, do horrible things, because we know that humans can do horrible things, and now I don't trust anybody because anybody can do that.
Right. And even I'll give you an example of something that I experienced. We had a situation where a truck was closing in on our convoy, and we went through the whole ROE, rules of engagement, and then ended up having to engage the windshield because he just would not stop, and he was barreling down in a dump truck. So anyways, this guy ended up with 2 sucking chest wounds, and we were trying to render aid to him. He was not a threat. He just didn't stop. And my platoon sergeant at that time walked up and just looked at him. He's like, "Are we done here?" As we were trying to save this guy's life. So, for me, I'm just like, man, how cold of a reaction. We're supposed to be here, not only, fighting, but also helping, the civilian population as well, at least from my point of view, wherever we could, when it was possible. So that for me, it still sticks with me today, that someone could, see someone in the process of dying, and, another human being, and just be like, can we get on with it already? So that's another one.
Right. And yes, there are those very, very large. I mean, and those aren't even the biggest ones, right?
Sure.
I usually talk about, back in 2011, the videos of the Marines that were desecrating the enemy remains, right? And everything that, that they were urinating, and they filmed it, and they put it online, and all this other thing that when I talk to veterans, they don't say, "I'm okay with that," but they say, "I understand how they got to that place in their head at that moment, if these guys had just taken the lives of their, so those are the very, high end, the egregious, the Abu Ghraibs and the My Lai back in Vietnam.
Right.
But then you have these, and they're not mundane, they're not everyday. But you also have the lower level moral injuries, and the fact that there were no stop signs in Afghanistan. There's no speed limits. There's no one-way street. And so if you're operating, and you said this before, the rules that were in, back home go out the window. If you're operating in a land of different rules and laws, and now you have to come back to a nation where you have to stand behind the little old lady in the checkout line writing a check out, that you're used to operating in a different way. And so it's like your sense of right and wrong could be knocked off on a bunch of different levels.
Right. And on top of that too, there's kind of this disdain, I think, for the ignorance of war, I think, in the civilian population. So I feel like there's a lot of resentment that I had to experience this, and now I'm standing behind someone in line complaining about their coffee not being hot enough. It's not the reality of what's going on in the world. So that I think there's some resentment as well that some veterans hold on to, where it's like, you guys have no idea, what's going on in the world, and you have this, the term ignorance is bliss, right? It's just there's a, at least for me, it's I had to experience this, and now I have to sit in a college class with 18-year-olds talking about the Iraq War. Oh my God, I'm going crazy. So,
well, yeah. And there's that idea of we open our eyes to arguably what is more important. This is another thing, veterans will think on a more global scale, because we are exposed to different cultures.
Right.
And then, arguably ignorance is wrong. And then we have opened our eyes to a right thing. And that's not necessarily a moral injury, but it does have moral frustration.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with you.
And so you had mentioned before that you had been diagnosed with PTSD, but it didn't really ring well or sit well with you. And I've heard this before. I actually had a guest on the show, David Smith. He was a Marine, Fallujah, I believe, because they usually were in Fallujah. That's pretty much where they were. But Dave was on the rooftop, and it was night, and there was a raid, and somebody came through the alley where they shouldn't be. He gave the challenge and password. They didn't respond, so he took a shot. Turned out to be another Marine. Horrible, right? And he, the guy survived, and they passed it up later, right? But as he and I were talking about this, he was like, it was the same thing. Everybody had told me it was all PTSD until I heard this term moral injury. And that's when the light bulb went off. It wasn't that I shot him. It was that I shot him. Right. And so I'm interested to hear how that shifted for you when you learned about moral injury, how that became to say, yes, that was what I'm going through. Yeah.
I mean, I think the post-traumatic stress disorder is so clinical that it really, I feel it kind of takes the humanity out of the experience. So, also I don't think you can medicate moral injury. So it manifests as grief, guilt, shame, these types of things you can't, wipe away with antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications or sleeping pills or, all the things that I was put on. So I think the beginning of it was when I was on all these medications and there was still an underlying something's there, right? So I'm like, okay, medication is not working for me. So I think once I kind of read about the concept and I was like, okay, so this makes more sense to me because at least for me personally, I was raised Catholic. So a lot of, the underlying, the very first thing you're taught is it's not okay to kill someone or take another life. So right out of the gate, you make that connection with like, okay, well, that's something I had to do, or, something I had to see, or something I had to do in a combat zone. So, how do I process that, or how do I even begin to forgive myself for the things that I've seen and the things that I've participated in and the things that I've done. So I think that once I started gaining an understanding of moral injury and really applying it to my situations, I think it gives a more depth to our situations as veterans and trauma in general. So I think moral injury and post-traumatic stress can occur at the same time, and I think they run parallel. And I think that, at least for me in my situation, it was like the post-traumatic stress symptoms happened, started manifesting 2 years into getting home, destroying relationships, abusing alcohol, panic attacks, flashbacks, these types of things. And I think that is due to a conditioning that we experience in war, right? We're in heightened sense of danger pretty much 24/7 for a year straight. It's hard to kind of turn that off. But I think at the same time, when you come home and then you start processing, okay, what happened? What actually happened? What kind of situations, was I in? That's when the moral injury, I think, starts to surface. And I think as time goes on, post-traumatic stress kind of lessens. Not that it goes away, and not that it, gets better, or that you're quote unquote healed from it. But I just think they kind of flip-flop to where now I'm really processing on a moral level what did I participate in and what did I do, not only as a person, but in my community. And here's another thing that really that I think is a pretty big conflict is a lot of veterans come home and they're greeted as heroes, but I didn't feel like a hero at all, really. When I came home, I'm like, I went there to do my job, and the job that we had to do was pretty grimy, and we were out there, we're kicking in doors, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that for me, that didn't really meet the definition of hero. And now I have, you have your community kind of putting you on this pedestal of being a hero, and you might not necessarily feel that way.
Again, this idea of what I believe to be true and what others believe to be true around me, they don't connect. And that right. is really, it's this, the moral compass, right?
Right.
And my true north on my moral compass, and veterans' true north on their moral compass, is is changed by their experience. I don't know how you grew up, but when I was 17 years old, it wasn't okay to point a gun at somebody's face and tell them what to do. Then, when you go to war, that becomes expected, that you point a gun at somebody's face and tell them what to do. And now you have to come back and not be that way. It's something that you had said about PTSD being clinical. You're absolutely right. There is a list of diagnostic criteria. As if we would diagnose diabetes, there is a list of criteria. And I, as a clinician, I recognize that. And there's a code in a book somewhere that says you have this, and there is medication for it. But that's not the case with other aspects of veteran mental health, and especially moral injury. Mm-hmm. I describe PTSD as an injury of the behavior. It has a neurological basis. A loud noise goes off, I hit the floor, whatever it is, right? So there's a trigger and response. It's much more complicated than that. But at the basic, that's what it is. Traumatic brain injury, again, a very large issue with returning veterans, is a physical injury, right? I bruise my brain, I bruise my elbow, but you've mentioned it before about moral injury being an injury of the soul, right? And you can't medicate the soul. You have to come to terms with it. I boil it down to this idea: is PTSD is a reaction to what happened, whereas moral injury is a reaction to why it happened.
That's great. And to quote my buddy Anthony, he always uses this one. It's really great. Is he said PTSD is what wakes me up in the middle of the night, and he said moral injury is what keeps me from falling asleep in the first place. So it's a nice I really enjoy that. That makes it really clear.
So now that you have learned about moral injury and you talk about it a lot, how do you see the clinical community responding? Because I see it responding in a certain way, but I'm interested to hear your point of view.
Yeah, I haven't really had too much interface with too much of the clinical community around moral injury. I think they acknowledge it, but because it can't be, it's not a clinical thing. I haven't really had too much experience with clinicians, getting in contact with me about it. But I have gotten a lot of response from the chaplaincy. The chaplains have really, I feel, kind of taken it on and are really there to kind of support. And they're kind of like, this is our territory. So that's been pretty interesting to see their response as well.
And I'm surprised. I mean, we're doing this by video, and I can't imagine the look that just went across my face when nobody in the clinical community has reached out to someone who is as vocal as you are. And there are a number of us who recognize it, right? I mean, you can get PTSD from any number of things. You can get PTSD from natural disasters and automobile accidents, where necessarily neither of those have an element of moral injury. PTSD from sexual assault absolutely has a component of moral injury too, especially if it is more common as to be an acquaintance or a family member. So it's a betrayal of not just a violation physically, but there is this idea of why. But from my perspective as a veteran, and I recognize that, 3 combat tours, 2 of them being significant. Well, yes, there's elements of PTSD, but my moral injury is around the fact that I gave permission for someone to go on a patrol that didn't need to go on the patrol, and she subsequently died. Right? That's not PTSD. I was not there when that happened.
Right.
And arguably there were about 80 of us surrounding that situation who all believe we have 100% of the blame. And not being able to process that with a therapist who's just trying to do, as you said, EMDR isn't necessarily going to touch that because it's not a memory, it's a belief.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I have a similar situation, to that as well. When my platoon sergeant was killed in action, I was given the day off, and we would do this occasionally when we had non-essential missions. We'd rotate a few guys out if we needed room in our vehicles or whatever. And that day I got the day off, and which didn't happen very often. So, I went around and did everything that I would do on a day off, which is like eat actual food in the chow hall and
laundry and gym and
go on go online and email and all that kind of stuff. And here I am enjoying myself, and my platoon sergeant is was killed, and I wasn't there. So, for years and years, I beat myself up about why did he die and why didn't I? He had a family, I didn't. I deserve to die, he didn't. These types of feelings I harbored in myself, and it would just be like a reel playing over and over and over again in my head. What could I have done differently if I was out there? Which is, looking at it from a perspective now, which is, there's nothing I could have done in that situation. But that's not, how we're trained, and we're kind of trained to sacrifice ourselves. In the end, it's kind of like, that's what we're there to do, is to support each other, the men and the women to the left and the right of you, and if necessary, give our lives to protect them or to help them, or so that was a big one for me that I really tried to tackle when I was walking across the country, and really process that.
See, and this is one of the things is, how do you do that? Survivor's guilt is what you were talking about, and definitely what I experienced. It's different. PTSD does not explain survivor's guilt. And as you said, the medication, you can't medicate away moral injury any more than you can medicate a lack of meaning and purpose. This is another issue that a lot of veterans experience is, I don't feel like what I'm doing now is as important as what I did. You were 21 when you came home from war, spending the rest of your life walking backwards, staring at the high point of your life when you're 21. Right. That's pretty horrible. And I know, and I'm sure veterans that are just like, the best time of my life was when I was in the firefight. And so these ideas of things beyond just PTSD and TBI and substance use and emotional stuff with depression, anxiety, these are all critical aspects of veteran mental health, and they have to be addressed. How are you seeing these other aspects addressed in the veteran community?
Well, I mean, there's two pathways that I've kind of witnessed is, finding something to replace that feeling, whether it's, doing adrenaline sports or, getting when we got back from our deployment, like I think 5 or 6 of us ended up getting crotch rockets, just immediately. We're like, okay, we're just going to do this because it's like, it gets you going, you get to a little danger in your life. And so like, I think that's one way. And some people do it with exercise. Some people do it with extreme sports. Or the path that I kind of took was like, I ended up, abusing a bunch of alcohol and prescription medications and different things like that to kind of mask a lot of the experiences that I went through. So either way, I think you're trying to just replace or mask over the actual traumatic events or the actual experiences with something, external, and it all really needs to, be addressed by you. And you have a saying, what you resist persists in your life. So this stuff's not going to go away if you're not going to address it. It's just going to keep compounding and manifesting itself in different ways in your life. And I think, for the listeners out there, it's kind of it was a wake up call for me to be like, look, I have to address it. Yeah, there's no other option.
So if veterans are listening to this and they're like, this sounds, right, what kind of resources do you usually point veterans to if they're wanting to learn more about moral injury?
Well, first of all, I mean, you can check out the documentary that I was in. You can rent it on iTunes, and it's on Amazon as well. It's like a couple bucks to rent it. So that can give you a good understanding of, some of the stuff I've been talking about in a more interesting way. So it follows me across the country, myself and Anthony, as we walk, and we kind of do this processing on camera and really try to be open and honest about our experiences. And on top of that, there are some really, there's some good literature out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. So yeah, it's one that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, but it's always nice to revisit that to really kind of get an understanding of how we process trauma, how we hold on to stress, how we, do these different things in our lives. And, there's also a lot of good books out there. I think one is called Soul Repair, that's specifically about moral injury in combat.
Oh, that's great. And yes, I am a firm believer of embodied emotion. It's really what Levine is talking about there in The Body Keeps the Score, is how trauma is trapped physically in our body.
Right.
I'll ask veterans, what does anger feel like? And they'll try to tell me what they think about anger, or what the cognitive, and people just aren't focused on how it physically feels.
Right.
And this is one thing when it comes to walking, as long as you did, but any kind of physical exercise, you're just too tired to be emotional about stuff, right? You're so worn out that now you can access these memories and these thoughts because your body is just like, I just don't have the energy to cry anymore.
Right. Right. And that's when you can do some really good work. So whether it's walking, and I the last couple of years, I've really kind of dove into the physical practice of yoga, meditation. These types of things get at trauma and stress that have been stored in our bodies for our whole life. So it's not just an exercise. It's an actual spiritual practice behind yoga and meditation that gets at things that we can't really see. And like you said, a lot of people kind of disassociate from their bodies when they have extreme stress and trauma in their life. So this is a way to get back into the body and really understand what's going on within you. Because once you have an understanding of what's going on in your body and your mind, it gives you a clearer picture of different ways of how I can address this and how I can move through it.
No, you're absolutely right. And not to say that you and I are going to change the Army or the military in any way, but we don't really, it's push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, right? That's just
right.
the way that they do it. But understanding the benefits of the exercise, and as you said, the spiritual aspect, or the moral aspect, the soul aspect of physical fitness, it can definitely benefit. So if people want to reach out, they want to maybe connect with you, learn more about, maybe some of the things that you're doing, or have a conversation, how can they find you online?
They can check out, I'm on Instagram at the Meditating Vet. You can find me on there, and also Facebook as well, just under the Meditating Vet. Should be pretty easy, Tom Voss.
I'll make sure to get both of those in the show notes. So I give you an opportunity to have maybe a last thought or two before we sign off.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, for us to really, as the veteran community, to really kind of go above and beyond to support each other, and to keep supporting each other. I know that, when we're in service, that's, something that was really, tight. We're really connected. We have I served with a lot of guys, and, some of them I didn't get along with, some of them I got along with really well. But at the end of the day, we're all willing to lay our lives down for each other. And I think that mentality we need to carry over into the veteran community, and really reach out to each other and make sure that we're doing okay. Buddy check. I mean, call the people that you served with, reach out to them online, see how they're doing. Really, we need to get this network moving and working, and supporting each other again, because I think the suicide epidemic that's going on right now is really unacceptable, and it's totally preventable. And I think, unfortunately, I think it's falling on us, the veteran community, to really take care of it, because we're seeing a complete failure, I think, overall from large entities. And I think that if we can, if you can reach out to 2 or 3 people that you served with, or 2 or 3 veterans that and within your own bandwidth, if you can do that, and keep in contact with your brothers and sisters, I think we can make progress with that.
No, you're absolutely right, and I appreciate that you brought that up with the suicide epidemic, and it even goes to our conversation so far. And I've said it often, longtime listeners know that If I walk in the doctor's office with a runny nose, I expect the doctor to tell me if it's the flu or allergies because they're going to treat those differently. Now, If I walk into a therapist's office and they say, combat vet, all you are is PTSD and it's actually moral injury, then I'm treating the wrong condition. I'm not treating the thing that needs to be treated, and ultimately perhaps moral injury may be the thing that takes them to the point of suicide when they're getting all of the PTSD treatment they need.
Correct. Right.
This has been great, Tom. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I hope to have you back again sometime.
Yeah, my pleasure, and I'm happy to come back.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing, where we're trying to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health. One of the terms that Tom mentioned in this episode is moral scaffolding. Scaffolding is the way that we integrate incoming information with information that we already have. We build what we learn on top of what we know. Scaffolding starts early in childhood, and we're taught about what's right and wrong from our home life, our peers, and sometimes our faith community, our culture at large. What Tom's talking about is how we learn things in combat that don't fit well with what we already know. For example, his buddy learned from an early age that we're supposed to help people that are hurt, but he learns from his patrol leader that he is not supposed to help people who are hurt when they have to get out the gate. Or Tom might have learned that he's supposed to be compassionate to others, especially if a mistake was made, like when the driver of the dump truck didn't stop. But his platoon sergeant demonstrated how compassion is not always an automatic response. This is the key element of moral injury. What we believe to be right and wrong in the world has been changed by our experiences. Doesn't mean that we're monsters. Tom also mentioned the writer David Wood in our conversation. In his book, What We Have Done, The Moral Injury of Our Longest Wars, Wood says this about moral injury. It does not mean that service members did something immoral. It means that they have violated their own sense of morality. I think Wood's explaining a key differentiation when it comes to moral injury. Maybe the violation occurred willingly, if unconsciously, or maybe it happened begrudgingly, like being ordered to move on and not help wounded casualties. Either way, the guilt and shame that we continue to carry around what was done or failed to be done can be as significant as the reactions to trauma. If you want to learn more about moral injury, take a look at the resources that we have on the Headspace and Timing blog by going to veteranmentalhealth.com/moral injury. Thanks for taking the time to listen. If you want to find the show notes for this episode, go to veteranmentalhealth.com/HST115. If you want to show your support for the work we're doing, make sure to leave an honest rating and review on the podcast platform you're listening to. We're always looking for guests, either veterans or those who support them. You can drop me a line at info@veteranmentalhealth.com to recommend guests, or you can go to veteranmentalhealth.com/guest to fill out a suggestion or request. Our thanks this month go to Give an Hour and the Campaign to Change Direction. Don't forget, we'll be joining them for the Week to Change Direction from June 9th through June 15th. If you want to see how you can too, go to changedirection.org.
A Week to Change Direction will happen anywhere and everywhere people and organizations want to be part of this change. Give an Hour will provide toolkits with suggestions and ideas for how you or your organization can participate in a Week to Change Direction, or you can create your own.
Just a reminder that the guests and information in this show are for educational purposes only and not meant to be considered professional advice. While I am a therapist, I'm not your therapist. If something you've heard makes you think that you should talk to somebody, then reach out to do so. I'd like to thank Doc Todd for giving us permission to use his track Not Alone from his album Combat Medicine. Doc's trying to bring the discussion about veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can see all of his work at therealdoctodd.com. Be on the lookout for another great episode, and until then, remember, veterans, you're not alone, ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stone. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic tendency, embrace my ability.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and stand up. How this life so demanding, so much pain on this planet. I heard each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. You're not alone.
And every time that I fall,
you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.